Hey, it's Lou, and some wild shit is going down in Malaysia, where political allies have turned on each other. Dissidents have teamed up with their persecutors, and a $4.5 billion corruption scandal helped bring down the only political party that has ever controlled the government. 61 years of autocratic rule was overturned in a stunning electoral upset, and sent a powerful warning to authoritarian leaders the world over. No matter how entrenched your power, you're a single election away from being voted out of office. Since gaining its independence from the British in the 1950s, Malaysian politics have been dominated by one party, UMNO. UMNO was able to gain the loyalty of the country's largest constituency, that's ethnic Malays, by giving them advantages over Chinese immigrants who represent a sizable chunk of the population. Under UMNO rule, Malays benefited from affirmative action, housing discounts, and job quotas, among many other things. And a powerful opposition force was never able to challenge UMNO because A, UMNO controlled the levers of power and blocked them at every opportunity through things like gerrymandering, and B, the opposition was really diverse and was unable to present a single, cohesive, unifying message. To be fair, UMNO did transform Malaysia into a modern economy. Much of that growth took place under Prime Minister Mahathir, which made him both popular and a little cocky. The guy was not a fan of dissent. He stamped out free speech and fired critics within the government, including Supreme Court judges. He was accused of eliminating the checks and balances designed to keep absolute power out of his hands. Now, early in Mahathir's political career, a potential rival emerged, Anwar Ibrahim. He was a charismatic student leader who pushed for Muslim empowerment. Sensing a threat, Mahathir actually welcomed Anwar into the UMNO fold. In fact, Anwar eventually became Mahathir's deputy prime minister. But as the economy turned south in the late 1990s, so did this Anwar-Mahathir alliance. Anwar started criticizing his boss and calling for reforms. But mysteriously, by coincidence, Anwar was suddenly charged with sodomy, specifically of having an affair with his wife's male driver. Malaysia isn't exactly a haven for gay people, so these were particularly nasty charges that were by most accounts completely made up. Anyway, Anwar gets convicted, sent to jail. Eventually his conviction is overturned, but he gets tried again on different sodomy charges and is thrown back behind bars. Meanwhile, Mahathir decides to retire in 2003, and he handpicks his successor. Turns out that successor is ineffectual. He's apparently a grandpa figure that falls asleep in meetings. So Mahathir calls for his ouster. He supports a new candidate for Prime Minister, Najib Razak. Unfortunately, Najib turns out to be a bit of a scoundrel, allegedly at least. He starts this fund called 1MDB. It's supposed to be for Malaysia's economic development, but it winds up being used to finance films like The Wolf of Wall Street and Dumb and Dumber 2. Somehow, funds from 1MDB are spent on artwork for Leonardo DiCaprio and jewelry for Miranda Kerr. Friends of the family suddenly have these baller yachts. Najib's wife receives a single $27 million necklace. Oh, and just about $700 million is discovered in Najib's personal bank account. He says it was a donation from an unnamed member of the Saudi royal family. Quite a donation. All of this looks terrible and draws the attention of international investigators in Switzerland, Dubai, Singapore, and the US. US Attorney General Jeff Sessions calls the 1MDB scandal, which involves $4.5 billion in misappropriated funds, kleptocracy at its worst. Back home in Malaysia, Najib fires his Attorney General. The new one he appoints quickly clears him of any wrongdoing. But Malaysians aren't stupid. They're pissed off.
An estimated 500,000 people took to the streets to call for the resignation of Najib over 1MDB.
One cartoonist keeps referring to Najib as the Man of Steel. The cartoonist gets charged with sedition and faces up to 43 years in prison. So that's the type of guy Najib is. And his family makes no effort to hide their gaudy and almost definitely stolen wealth. Even as this scandal becomes a national obsession, his wife's extravagance is legendary. This particularly pisses off your average Malaysian because Najib recently levied a new tax on goods and services. Bridget Welsh, a Malaysian scholar at John Cabot University, told me the vast majority of Malaysians never had to pay any taxes at all. 40% of the country lives on just $1,000 a month. So now, for the first time ever, your average citizen is chipping into a government coffer that the Prime Minister is likely stealing from. Okay, so enough is enough. Najib and UMNO are losing support. But the problem is, the opposition is still disorganized. In fact, some opposition leaders are in jail, and there's still racial and religious tensions in the country that prevent Malay voters from abandoning UMNO. Who the hell is going to bring down Najib? Enter back into this shitstorm Mahathir. He's now 92 years old, and he says he's humiliated by the fact that Najib has corrupted UMNO. He feels guilty for initially supporting him. So he aligns himself with these fractured bits of opposition, many of whom despise him, but will hold their nose in order to defeat a common enemy. This is like George W. Bush running as a Democrat in 2020. But anyway, here's the kicker. Mahathir recognizes that he's old. He understands that he's an establishment figure at a time when the establishment is deeply unpopular. So he says, if I'm elected prime minister, I will hand over power to Anwar. Yes, that same Anwar who he put in jail for sodomy and who was beaten by Mahathir's police force. In a crazy about-face, Mahathir promises a pardon, and he even makes Anwar's wife his running mate. Imagine campaigning with the guy who put your husband in jail for sodomy. So this whole dynamic seemed suspicious to me. Mahathir, the former autocrat who jailed critics, who turned on former allies in the past, Malaysians should just trust him now? They actually think he'll hand over power? Isn't he responsible for this mess in the first place? Chinwat Wong, a Malaysian political scientist, understood my skepticism, but he offered a Zen one-liner. The man who tied the bell around the tiger's neck is the only one who can remove it. In other words, Mahathir, one of the chief architects of the UMNO machine, is best qualified to bring it down. Professor Welsh added, sometimes you live long enough to see your mistakes, so perhaps he's simply got a different perspective now. But anyway, none of this seemed to matter, because leading up to the May elections, Najib used all his levers of power to try and fix the race. He banned Mahathir's photo on billboards, he threatened to arrest him for spreading fake news, he gerrymandered districts, he even made the election fall on a weekday, a move clearly designed to depress voter turnout. So because of all these advantages, most experts thought he'd easily get reelected. The experts were wrong. For the first time in 6 decades, UMNO lost control of the government. Malays, immigrants, secularists, Muslims, Christians, they all put aside their differences and worked together to kick out the scoundrel. Najib actually tried to flee the country, but the authorities stopped him. A new commission has been impaneled to investigate the 1MDB scandal, and Najib's family had hundreds of suitcases and boxes full of cash, jewelry, and expensive handbags confiscated. DiCaprio and Kerr handed over the gifts they received to authorities a while ago, by the way. Encouragingly, Mahathir has secured Anwar's pardon from Malaysia's king. Long story, don't have time to get into it. And Anwar's finally out of jail.
How does it feel to be out this time?
Exhilarating.
It's unclear when he'll take over, or if he'll take over. Joseph Liao Chin Yang, a professor of international politics based in Singapore, told me that the real challenge begins now. The opposition forces had very little in common other than their hatred for Najib, and old rivalries are already emerging. A unified agenda isn't apparent. To quote Hamilton, winning is easy, young man. Governing is harder. Professor Welsh is more optimistic. Yes, questions remain. Yes, there should be healthy skepticism. But at the end of the day, Malaysians finally rejected their one-party system, a culture that tolerated corruption, that let ethnic and religious differences divide them, put those aside, rallied together, and said, we want change. And they made it happen peacefully. Perhaps it's a lesson to the rest of the world. Even when the deck is stacked against you, you can overcome your shitty leaders at the ballot box.